Enough commercials. We're going to talk about Dee Dee Wacksman for a minute here. Dee Dee grew up in northeastern Ohio, was an Ohio State fan, so I'm wearing Ohio State colors.
Go Bucks!
And she moved to Bay City in 1978 with her husband, Rick. She has been involved with the Historical Society as a co-founder of River of Time, co-founder of the Civil War Roundtable, member of the Board of Trustees at Delta College for 18 years, and she serves on the board of the Bay Area Community Foundation, as well as she's in the Bay City Newton Rotary Club. Her hobbies include visiting historical sites, archaeology, all types of needlework, and reenacting stories of historic women. She got interested in women's history while taking a political science class at Delta College in 1995. Sister, there's still hope for you yet. Where she learned about the women's suffrage movement. She has been an advocate for that topic since then. Big round of applause to Dee Dee Wacksman.
Okay, first of all, I think what we should all do is close our eyes. Now think, this is March 2020. We were all ready to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the fact that women got the vote last year in August. So we missed a little time, but we're going to catch up today. You'll have more information than you'll ever want to know about the women's suffrage movement, and I can give you many other resources to look into it. So let's get started. Okay, here we are. Women's History Month is always in March. It's been that way for a number of years. The beginning of the women's suffrage movement started at a place called Seneca Falls, New York. It started in a chapel called the Wesleyan Chapel. And the reason they had it there was because they were a group of women who met together at a house in Waterloo, New York, nearby. One was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one was Lucretia Mott. Interestingly, they were both Quakers. In the Quaker community, women have very, very strong rights. They were equal to the men. So it's not surprising that Quaker women were very involved with this movement. Both of those women had gone to meetings. One went to a anti-slavery meeting in London with her husband, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Susan B. Anthony had gone to a temperance meeting, and she was turned away. She wasn't allowed to speak. So these women decided that we need to do something so we have a little bit more opportunity. We need to be able to speak. They decided to have their meeting in Seneca Falls because many of them lived in that area. It was in July 1848. 300 women and men attended. They posted flyers in different community buildings. They put it in the newspaper. So they had a number of people who came. This is where they met. This is what's left of where they met, the Wesleyan Chapel. And that building had been used for a number of social events and programs through the years. It's now a wonderful park that you can go visit, and you see this building. Outside of the building is this plaque, and this is called the Declaration of Sentiments. This was something that Elizabeth Cady Stanton pretty much authored by herself. There were a large number of requests and ideas presented in this document, but the one that really stood out was this one. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise, meaning that she was not allowed to vote. And we have a copy of the Declaration of Sentiments outside. It's on a piece of brown parchment as you go out by the left side of the theater. So there were another couple of women that got involved in this movement, and this is what I call the handshake that changed the world. At least it changed the world here in the United States. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, we know a little bit about her, Susan B. Anthony, and Amelia Jenks Bloomer. And if you can see what I have on, I am modeling a Bloomer outfit in honor of Amelia Bloomer. This is a statue that you can go see in Seneca Falls, of the three women meeting. This was in 1851. Susan B. Anthony was in town for a temperance meeting, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton lived there, and Amelia Bloomer was there because her husband was the postmaster, and she often worked as a postmistress in the post office there in Seneca Falls. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Amelia Bloomer knew each other, and then they ran into Susan B. Anthony on the street, and this is where the handshake took place. That started a 40-year friendship with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And I think it was interesting, while I was reviewing some information, I found out that Susan B. has no name. There is no B name. When she was a child, it was very interesting to people to have middle names, and she had none. So she picked the letter B because she was named after her Aunt Susan, who was married to a man whose last name was Brownell. So you will never see that B letter spelled out into a name. It was always Susan B. Anthony. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, of course, she was living in the Seneca Falls area. She was married to a lawyer. She had 6 children. In her childhood, her father was a lawyer, and she used to read his legal books. She couldn't go to school. She couldn't go to college. No women were going to college at the time. And she used to read about these cases of women who were losing their children and losing their pay and being abused by their husbands and had no way to defend themselves, no rights, no ability to keep their money, keep their children. And she thought that was wrong. So it was inevitable that she would get involved with this fight. Now we have Susan B. Anthony with the letter B, was a single woman. She was a school teacher. She had worked at a number of Quaker schools, and she saw that the men who were working there were getting paid more than she was. So of course, she was not a happy person either, and being of the Quaker faith, she had some authority in her, so she was a perfect person to get involved in this program. And here we have Amelia Bloomer, my hero. She, as I said, was married to a man who was a postmaster. Eventually, she started to publish a newspaper for women, a newsletter. And in that newsletter, she had a diagram, a drawing of this particular outfit. She didn't design it. She was a friend of a gentleman named Garrett Smith. Garrett Smith was a very strong abolitionist person. His daughter had been on tour in Europe and came back to New York in an outfit that looked like this. It was basically what people wore for mountain climbing. The Turkish trousers, the short skirt, probably not a corset, some sort of jacket. And of course, the ladies in Seneca Falls thought, wow, look at this. I don't have to wear a hoop skirt. I don't have to hold up my skirt when I'm going up and down the steps and hold on to my kid at the same time. So it was quite a boon to the ladies in the Seneca Falls area and some of the other communities. However, because it was considered so outlandish and so unusual that many of the suffrage women did not continue to wear those clothes because it drew too much attention away from what they were saying by people saying things about their clothing. But eventually, when ladies started riding bicycles, you see a lot of these trousers show up. And of course, we all know today, how many people in this audience have on a skirt? There you go. That's where it started. In 1851, a person of some note went to the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, Sojourner Truth, and this is one of the things that she said, and I think you can probably read it yourself, but it's a pretty strong comment, and she was quite an outspoken speaker and showed up at a lot of the early suffrage movement programs and meetings. Everybody have a chance to read that? We all know who the first woman was, right? Eve? Okay. So that was what was happening in the New York State. We had lots of women in this area that were also working on the suffrage campaign. These are just a few of the names. We have one special lady who a lot of us know about already, and that's the last name, May Stocking Naggs. She lived in a beautiful home off of Center Avenue. Unfortunately, the home burned down about 4 years ago, and a teacher from Delta College, Pat Drury, lived in that home, and it was going to be open to the public in the future, but it had a wiring issue and it burned down. But May Naggs was very involved with some of the meetings that took place in this community, and of course there were other people from the Saginaw community. That's May Naggs. And her husband was involved in the insurance business, so they were a pretty prominent family, which she had children, but she had a very supportive husband who gave her the time to do some of these suffrage meetings and programs that some of the other ladies who had other things to do didn't have the chance to do. And there's some names from Saginaw County. I don't have any pictures of anybody from Saginaw County, but you may recognize some of those names for some of the buildings and parks and things that are in Saginaw County. Okay, this is an article that was in the Bay City Times Tribune about Susan B. Anthony coming to visit in Bay City. She spoke at one of the churches, says she's a clever speaker, and years of her experience have made the pioneer of the women's suffrage movement a lecture well worth listening to. We're not sure, but we think that she probably stayed at May Naggs' home off of Center Avenue. And when that house was still standing, there was a room that was basically dedicated to Susan B. Anthony, and it had paintings on the bed of her initials. It was really cool. It's too bad that house is no longer there. But she was here. Also, there are some newspaper articles that show that Elizabeth Cady Stanton also came to town. So, you know, even though Bay City was not a backwater town, it was quite prosperous at the time. Lots of those big name speakers were coming through town and talking with the ladies and gentlemen who were here. Some of the women were in marches. They also had a tent at the Michigan State Fair. You can see these ladies brought their children. I'm sure if you were growing up at that time and your mother was involved, you knew all about it. And you were probably tired of being dragged out to parades and meetings and things. But those girls grew up with a strong, strong advocate for people to vote. And that's the kind of clothes that they wore. At certain times they wore white in the parades. At other times they wore mostly black because that's what most women were wearing at the time. Okay, some of the women went to Washington where they had marches. Now, the Washington marches didn't start until around 1913, 1914, 1915. By that time, the suffrage program, the suffrage groups had split and got back together again and split. There was a militant group and there was the let's do it by being politically savvy group. A lot of these marches were started at the time when Woodrow Wilson was coming into office. In fact, there was one march that was done when he came by train to Washington, and there were no people there to greet him. And he thought, where are all these people? Well, they were all watching the women march. So they made a point that day. Eventually, bad things started to happen at those marches. Men were very unhappy watching this, and they would attack the women, and they would throw things, and they were very hostile at the time. And unfortunately, the police, who were all men at the time, just stood by and watched. So they didn't get the support from any of those officials. In fact, they probably had trouble with the police as well as the people who were throwing things at them. There's also a time, right about that time, 1916, 1917, actually at the time of World War I, when women picketed at the White House. And this actually has some people's names from Michigan who were there in 1917. You probably can't read the sign, but most of the signs had something to do with the fact that we're fighting for democracy for people in Germany and France, and we don't really have democracy here for all our people. And they would have banners that would say, President Wilson, what will you do for women? What will you do for democracy? And it obviously was a very difficult time for the suffrage movement. They tried to get President Wilson on their side. Eventually what happened was that President Wilson realized how much work the women were doing for the war effort and realized that we can ask them to work, or we can ask them to do all these hard things. Why can't we let them have some more rights? Why can't we let them have some power? They're working hard for us. Let us help them along. So that really helped to move things along. At the same time these ladies were picketing, of course, there were lots of people who were antagonistic toward them, threw things at them, dragged them away, beat them up, took them to jail. There's a good movie, if you haven't seen it, called Iron-Jawed Angels. It tells the story of the women who were taken from the pickets and put in a workhouse that's across the river from Washington. And they were held in cells there for a long, long time. They were beaten, they were abused. One of their leaders was hung by her hands from the top of the jail cell overnight. So you can imagine how uncomfortable and how painful that would be. Some of them went on a hunger strike. When that happened, they were force-fed until they vomited. So until some word of that got out, and I believe it got out through a senator's wife who may have been jailed, no one knew what was going on in that workhouse, that what was happening to these women. And by and large, a lot of these were prominent Washington women and prominent Michigan women. Nobody was out there, that had 5 kids at home and they were doing the laundry all day. These were women who had some means to take some time to do these things. So it was a pretty bad time, and there was one night that they called the Night of Terror, when the guards came in and beat people and just abused them terribly. And we think, how could that happen? Well, it did happen, and I think it's probably happening in some places of the world today. So finally, the amendment made it through Congress. Both houses of Congress had to pass it, and it happened on May 19th, 1919. There was a joint resolution of Congress, and you can see what it says right there, that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Of course, we had a number of amendments that had been passed before this that allowed men to be called citizens so they could vote, and then another amendment that allowed former slaves to be able to vote. And when that was passed, the women in the suffrage movement were quite upset because they thought that when the African American men, the slaves, were able to vote, that they should be able to vote also. So that drove a little bit of a wedge between some of the suffrage groups. Some supported that vote, and some didn't. And so that caused a little turmoil. But finally, on May 19th, this joint resolution of Congress was passed, allowing this amendment to go to the states. Now, the amendments of the Constitution have to be ratified by 3/4 of our states. So it had to go to 36 states. The Anthony Amendment, it's called the Anthony Amendment. It came up in Congress like every year for 50 years. Every year. It came up, every year it went down. And this is an article that was in the Saginaw News. It says, suffrage put into effect by Colby's action. Colby was the Secretary of State, and he was the one who was in charge of saying, yes, we do change the Constitution, we're adding this amendment. The state that put it past the 36 was Tennessee. And there's a real story about that. If you ever want to do some interesting reading, read about Tennessee and their vote for ratifying women's suffrage. It happened by one vote, and it happened because a young legislator, his name was Harry Burns, had a note in his pocket from his mother who said, vote for Mrs. Catt, the woman who was in charge at the time, and let suffrage go through. And at that time, he had been opposed. But when he got his note from his mother, he decided he would go for it. So it went by one vote. There were other states that never did ratify it until much later. Michigan was one of the first. It actually ratified it in June of 1919. And of course, it was only passed in Congress in May of 1919. So our legislator was really on the ball and got it taken care of right away. Wisconsin was another one that was really early. Some states, like I said, just never ratified it until some of them way into the 1960s. So we could be proud of our legislature to get on board as soon as they did. And of course, after that happened, you started seeing political cartoons. Mother's got her papers on the floor, vote for Cox, vote for Harding, a speech by this person, a speech by that person. And of course, political cartoons come out almost as soon as something happens. So this is just an example of one of the ones that was there. Some of them were not quite as kind as this one, but this is kind of an interesting one that she's getting ready to do her vote. And this will give you an inkling of where we stood in the world about getting the vote. You can see there were any number of countries that were far ahead of us. Some countries that you think, oh, that's kind of unusual, isn't it? But that's where we were. And there were other countries that were considerably later in allowing women to vote. The other thing that I think is kind of connected with this, that so many countries have had female leaders, presidents, people that were in charge of the government, Golda Meir. I mean, there's Margaret Thatcher. Look at all the countries who've had women in charge. And we're still trying to get there. I think we're getting closer, but we're not really, at the front of the pack on those things. But here's where we were with getting the vote. So this is one of my favorite sayings that I think holds true for a lot of things. And never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And when you think about many movements, some of them are just one or two people, and there's still many of them going on today. And you have to be committed, and you can get things done. And I found another quote just last night that I thought kind of lended itself to this. I'm not sure where it came from, but it says, commitment is the ability to make a decision and stand by it. Non-committed people spend their lives exploring endless possibilities and then doing nothing. Action requires courage. Without courage, little is accomplished. And then it says, give women's rights and history a chance. So when you think about that, that commitment is what got this through. And one of Susan B. Anthony's favorite phrases, and maybe the last thing she ever said, she died about 12 years before the amendment was passed. Failure is impossible. And that was her leading leading the way to keep things going over all those years. It was 72 years from the beginning to the end. So when you think of, I mean, that's a lifetime. It's, for many people, it's more than a lifetime. How long it took and how hard the fight was to get that opportunity. So, where can you find out more about this subject? Well, there's lots of places. One of them is the Michigan Women's Historical Center in Hall of Fame in Lansing. And it's an old building that was the Cooley House. They have an area that has pictures of all the women that they have put in there for their Michigan Hall of Fame, including Maine Aggs. It took 11 years for Maine Aggs to get her in there, but eventually Pat Drury and myself got her into the Women's Hall of Fame. But there's some information about that. It has in the past been open to the public, but if you think you want to go, you really need to look into it first, because I know recently they had some flooding, and I'm not sure if they're open yet. And this is another group that has kind of taken over the Michigan history, Michigan Women History part. It's called Michigan Women Forward, and it's down in Detroit. And they kind of combined with the Michigan Historical Center and created a new group, and that's where they are located. So that's my story for today. I know you noticed that I'm wearing a banner that said Votes for Women. Most of the women wore these, something like this, in the parades, in the marches, in the picketing, whatever they were at. They wore a banner. The new banner, which I have, looks like this. Women win the vote, not votes for women. Women win the vote. And had we been doing things last year, you would have seen me marching around town at all times wearing my Women Win the Vote sash, because I was so excited about the 100th anniversary. But we'll do it now. So there are lots of posters up here, and I would like you to take a look at some of those. I did promise that we would be having a drawing. I need the tickets. Some of you know that I'm going to be moving soon to the state of Maine to be near my son and his family. So I have been cleaning out lots of things. And some of the things I cleaned out I have here on the table, and we're going to give them kind of like door prizes. So I'm going to, first thing first is the Rosie the Riveter teddy bear. This is not going to be found very easily anyplace else. So whoever has the winning ticket, if you have a child or a grandchild, boy, what a great present this would be. So get your tickets out. And it would be, let's see, 262-300. 262-300. Yay. Keith, it's you? You got a granddaughter? Two granddaughters. Good for you. Good for you. Okay. I know this guy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll treasure it.
Okay. All right, next one. There's a variety of books up here. 262-297. 262-297. Who's me? Okay, come on up. Who is that?
It's Teresa.
Oh, I can't see who it is. Women of Bay County. Some of this book may be available in the Historical Museum still. It's a pretty good book.
This is the number, isn't it?
Oh, I know this lady.
I met you at
Yeah,
the state
I know.
fair.
I recognize your voice. Small world, isn't it?
Oh, thank you.
Smaller all the time. Okay, 262-270. 270. Yes, going once, going twice? Okay. You might like this one. Let's see. I don't think you want to wear the Michiganian. Oh, Steve. I couldn't tell who it was. Okay, Steve, let's see. I know. Here, share that with Kelly.
Hey, good. I'll do that. Thank you.
262-287. 287. Okay, can you get up here? If not, we can run it back to you.
I could just read it.
Sure, why don't you give it this one?
Yeah.
Well, we're doing that. I will tell you there's a terrific book out a few years ago. Oh my gosh, it's heavy. Winning the Vote. It's very comprehensive. But if you're really interested in it, there may or may not be one in the Bay City Library. I'm not sure. We should get one. But it's a very good book. It's very comprehensive. Okay, 277. 277. Okay, here, let's give her this one.
277?
Yeah. I also can tell you that if you want to get a copy of the history of the women's suffrage movement that was written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Matilda Gage, who was a writer, you're welcome to do that. It's 6 volumes. It's 5,700 pages. So you could spend the rest of your life reading that book. I have to admit, I have not. I have done this one, but I have not done that one. And not likely to do that. I can't read that long. 268. 268. Oh, way back there in the back. Okay, there you go. Now I have to make sure this next one, somebody's living in Michigan. Is everybody here living in Michigan? Okay, good. Well, it's a t-shirt. It's from the Women's Hall of Fame, and it said, Michiganians, meet your makers. So there you go. And it's pretty large, so it could fit almost everybody. I have to find one that says, if you live in Maine, meet your makers. 306. 306. Nancy, here you go. Okay. I think that's about all I have to tell you. I would like you to see some of our posters up here. I also would like you to make sure you pick up something on that table going out there. Those newspaper things are from a group out of California, the National Women's History Project. They have great publications, and they're worth picking up and taking a look at. I also have to tell you that there's a group of women working now about maybe 15 years to get a women's history museum in Washington, D.C. And I've been involved with that for a long, long time. I keep thinking, is it going to take 72 years to get us our own museum? Come on. They had to go through Congress. They had to do this. They had a location on the mall. Then they couldn't get the location on the mall. It's privately funded. It's pretty well supported by a lot of members of Congress, particularly the women. You know, there's a museum for every sort of thing in Washington, D.C., but there's no Women's History Museum. So if you're so inclined, look it up online. It's called the National Women's History Museum. They have a pretty big online presence. They do a lot of teachers programs, lesson plans, all kinds of good things online. But it would be nice someday, at least in my lifetime, to be able to go to that museum. So I'm sorry, I get a little verklempt. This is a topic that's real near to my heart. So if you have some questions, I'd be glad to try and answer them. We have several people here who are pretty knowledgeable, and I have to thank them for their help. Where is Sam Fitzpatrick? Over here. Sam is from the Historical Museum, and he helped me put together this crazy PowerPoint program. He's been helping me for months now, so thank you very much, Sam. Paul Phillips is back there at the desk. He's the tech guy for the Bay City State Theater. puts up with a lot of people. Mike Batchgalupo, who is in charge here, who's just melting away into nothingness. Cindy Lavasser, stand up, Cindy. Cindy's the next in line for the suffrage programs. She was the one who put together the group that was in the St. Patrick's Day Parade a year or so ago. So keep Cindy's name in your head, because you'll be hearing and seeing more from her. Linda Forster, who was my helper over here, she's Elizabeth Cady Scanton today. So be sure you look at everything. Thanks for coming. Stay well, and
Don't go anywhere yet.
vote. You know, I'm thinking, as I got ready for this, I thought, if there was ever a time to talk about voting and elections, I mean, could it be now? With all the things that have been going on with voting and elections, it's just got to be so important for everybody. So just make sure you keep it in mind and always do it. Don't let them tell you it's not working. Just do it. Thanks.
Let's give Dee Dee a big round of applause. Dee Dee has been a big part of the museum's life. She's been a part of Bay County. She's been a part of everywhere. If she had a project, last year she came to me and said, I got a project. We need to get Annie Edson Taylor over by the Waterfall Park. And so, with the help of Rob Clark, Dee Dee, and myself, we got a big picture of Annie Edson Taylor over at the Waterfall Park. When Dee Dee asks, we try to get it done. So, give her a big round of applause for that. We have a little gift for you to hang on your wall. Don't give this away. This is a 100-year anniversary of the museum. It was a painting, and it's engraved at the bottom. So thank you so much for everything. We're going to miss you, definitely.